I had been familiar with the work of Rachel Monroe, a freelance superstar and author of the book Savage Appetites. She wrote an incredibly popular feature on van life for the New Yorker a few years ago that for a time was the most read story on the entire website for several weeks, maybe months. Who knows? As someone who has pined for a VW bus for the better part of the past 10 years, there's one for sale in Salem, Oregon. It's actually in really good condition for like $10,000, but me no have $10,000. As someone who is, like I said, pined for one of these, the story spoke to me and made me also like deeply sad, mainly because of the social media curation and influencer narcissism element of the thing. And then the real sad element is like some of the middle-aged dudes who saw the van people and also pined for it. And at the age of 41, I am that middle-aged dude. That's a gut punch already. Anyway, so I get the existential dread and sadness that creeps in as you look around and wonder where your life went wrong. And you're 41 years old, and you're no closer to your goals than you were at 21, and it was cute then, but it's pretty pathetic now. Shit. Where are we? Oh, man. Rachel Monroe came across my radar as a guest when I interviewed Jordan Michael Smith about his piece, The Snitch, for the Atavist magazine. He was following her on Twitter. She's a good Twitter follow, @Rach Monroe. She said something about the story, and he asked for the contacts if he could follow up on it. She gladly gave up some info so he could run with it. He was super grateful, and I'm like, this Rachel Monroe character, I gotta talk to this person. And as luck would have it, she has a new piece in a recent issue of The New Yorker about ransomware and hacker negotiators. So, like, what timing? What a world. Riff. Hey, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. Let's get into a little ad read. Why not? Support for the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by West Virginia Wesleyan College's low residency MFA in creative writing. Now in its 10th year, this affordable program boasts a low student-to-faculty ratio and a strong sense of community. Recent CNF faculty include Randon Billings Noble, Jeremy Jones, and CNF Pod alum Sarah Einstein. There's also fiction and poetry tracks. Recent faculty there include Ashley Bryant Phillips and Jacinta Townsend, as well as Diane Gilliam and Savannah Sipple. No matter your discipline, if you're looking to up your craft or learn a new one, consider West Virginia Wesleyan, right in the heart of Appalachia. Visit mfa.wvwc.edu for more information and dates of enrollment. And also be sure to keep the conversation going on social media @CNFPod. And if you're feeling kind, reviews are always welcome. They're stagnant, and I'm going to just stop asking at this point. But if you want to leave one, go for it. They all help. If you don't want to, you're not alone. And from now until August, I plan on giving the loudest of shout-outs to Hippocamp 2021. It's back this year in lovely Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Registration's open. It's a conference for creative nonfiction writers. Marion Winnick will be this year's keynote speaker. We've got a debut CNF author panel featuring Lily Danziger. Remember her from a few episodes back? Greg Mania, Carol Smith, and Janine Willette. Dates are August 13th through the 15th. You dig it? And if you use the promo code CNFPod21, you can get $50 off your registration fee. You can buy me a beer with the savings, or some books, or maybe a beer. Brendan likes beer. And you've heard me say in the past, if you want to get in shape, you hire a personal trainer. I mean, Roger Federer, maybe the greatest tennis player of all time, he hired a coach. He didn't really need a coach, but he hired a coach. Listen, you know the fundamentals, but sometimes that trainer, that coach, is there to hold you accountable and put you through the paces and see things you can't see, and to keep your chin up when it inevitably falls down to your chest. So that's where I like to come in. So if you're ready to level up, I'd be honored to help you get where you and your book or essay or book proposal needs to go. Email me and we'll start a dialogue. So Rachel Monroe, @Rach Monroe on Twitter, is my guest. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Oxford American, And we get into pitching, reporting, living in remote places and away from the publishing epicenters, and talking about things writers don't tweet about, like killed stories and content marketing. Those things that tend to keep the lights on so you can take big swings and write these features for these magazines that on its own is unsustainable unless you're like a salaried staff writer. So oftentimes there are these other things that are subsidizing that kind of journalism that we see the writers tweet about. You're like, how the hell are they doing that? Well, they're not. They're doing this other thing too. And so we talk a little bit about that. And let's see, is that it? That is it. I'm stoked for you to check this one out. It's a headbanger, baby. But before we get to that, one more thing. I just want to give a Patreon shout out to Izidra Menkos for being a Tier 3 CNFer. Big ups. Just want to give a shout out to that and how deeply appreciative I am of your support. Thank you very much. Happy writing. And so let's get on with the show. You ready for this?
Probably like a lot of people, okay, what I'll say is like people ask me all the time, I guess because I'm a writer, like what are you reading? And I had this terrible experience recently where somebody was asking me for a book recommendation. I couldn't think of anything because everything that I was reading was for work, right? So I'm reading a bunch of books about like gun policy. I was like, I'm not going to recommend this to my friend in the post office. Like nobody else needs to be reading this. So over the past like few months, I made a real conscious effort to try to read just for fun, like, which, I'm like such a book person. It's such a shame that I have to make this an assignment for myself. So I've been following completely my own urges, which have led me to be rereading the Hilary Mantel book about the French Revolution, which I've already read. Cool. And it's like 800 pages. And there's like still a king, and I'm like 500 pages into it. But I don't know. I find it really delicious. And then I'm listening to this like incredibly long podcast about the French Revolution too, because she, in her Hilary Mantel way, like you're like, wait, what is actually happening historically? So this podcast is like giving me all of the stuff about the Assembly General and, who's the Minister of the Interior, which, so I'm just like, it has like nothing to do with what I'm working on. I've already read this book, but for whatever reason right now I'm like obsessed with the French Revolution.
So I read in an interview that great profile from Columbia Journalism Review about you that you were, when you were a kid, you were a ready righty kind of kid in Richmond, Virginia. So take us there and to the ready righty Rachel Monroe of urban Virginia.
I mean, well, suburban. I was just like such a total little nerd. I had glasses from when I was in kindergarten. I think I have like really terrible eyes. So you just like picture this like little Rachel with like incredibly thick glasses with like pink frames. And I definitely would read a book as I was walking around and like at least once like walked into something like, a pillar or something. So pretty classic in that way. I don't know. It was just always like a world in which I felt really at home, being absorbed in stories. I just love stories. And I still do.
And at what point does it kind of click in your head that being a writer is something you want to do?
I mean, it's funny. I actually have. I feel like for most things in life, those decisions come on in a really like vague way, sort of like at the slow movement of the tides or whatever. But for me, I actually do have a distinctive moment when I was like, I think I want to try to do this, which was just after college. I spent a year. I got a Fulbright, and I spent a year in Morocco. And I was like studying Arabic, and there was sort of a chance that my life could have gone in a very different direction. And I would have been, like, I don't know, maybe an international development person, like an NGO person. I don't know. I really love traveling. I love the Middle East. And a lot of the folks that I was there with on the Fulbright, we're heading in that direction, or doing that now. And we went on this hike on the Reef Mountains, and I just remember sitting down. Maybe this is like a big area of like hashish cultivation, so there might have been some of that involved, but I'm not entirely. I don't remember. I remember just like sitting down at a pause on this hike and being like, if I wanted to do this writing thing, I could do it. If I want to make a go of it, I just have to like admit that to myself and try. And I think that I do. And then I went back and just like applied to MFA programs. It was just one of those like really clearly articulated thoughts. I was just like, if you want to do this, you have to say that to yourself, and then you have to like take the actions that follow after admitting to yourself that you want to do this. And yeah, so I was, and in retrospect, I'm like very proud of myself for, I think that's a sort of scary step. And applying to MFA programs, from Morocco was like not the easiest, because it was only somewhat online at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think all the more challenging must have been that, your parents being doctors and having more sort of traditional secure route. If you find out that your child is going to pursue a more artistic path, that can lead to a lot of resistance on the part of the person trying to pursue that path. So I imagine you had support. Maybe you didn't, but what was that like for you, just knowing that you were going to be taking a more unconventional path?
Well, it's funny. Well, I guess two things. Like, one thing is my parents were doctors, so they were financially secure. So I graduated with no student debt. I graduated undergrad with no student debt. So I like
Mm-hmm.
that was like a huge advantage in me being able to like, pursue an unconventional path. I think that's pretty important to acknowledge, the huge advantage there. And I'm actually like from a family of writers. I have like a bunch of published writers. My mom is one of 6 kids, and 4 of them have published books. I have an uncle who was like a journalist in Denver. My aunt, like, has written a bunch of books and reviews books for the New York Times Book Review. So it's like that side of the family is like a super literary, and my mom was sort of an aberration. And I think both of my parents, even though they were doctors, are like frustrated creative people or sublimated creative people.
Yeah.
So my little brother's a doctor, so it's great. He can pay for their nursing home, and then I can be the like creative child. And our other brother is going to like give them children. So it's perfect between the 3 of us. That's like, it's all taken care of.
Yeah. So do you think that, having pursued a more fiction path has helped you with your journalism?
It's so funny because I think at first, early on in my career, I would get kind of frustrated with myself and be like, why didn't I figure out that I wanted to do nonfiction earlier? I could have gone to journalism school, or at least like a nonfiction program where I would have learned actual skills for how to do this. But I think as time has gone on, I've come around to think that it is more of an advantage, just because I spent so much time in those programs, in those fiction writing workshops, like focusing on things about like how to write a scene, right? Like how to capture a little like detail, narrative structure, things like that, which I think are so crucial, at least for like the kind of extended long form nonfiction stuff. It's so important. So, and the other things, like how to FOIA, how to interview, all those other aspects. I mean, I think it would have been a big help to have somebody guide me through this, but you can pick up that stuff. You can figure out how to do the more technical things. That training and like paying really close attention to like the texture of a sentence and the sensory details that make up a scene. I guess I'm glad that that's like what was drilled into me.
Yes, when I read various anthologies, whether it be Best American Sports Writing or Travel Writing or whatever it is, some of the greatest long form journalism I read is from novelists or short story writers like a Karen Russell or a George Saunders. When you turn them loose on nonfiction, it's like, wow, this is pretty electric stuff, and that just comes from those fundamentals of using dialogue over quotes, and making sure you're showing and not telling, these basic tenets of narrative storytelling that's drilled into you in fiction because you get to make it up whole cloth. But if you have that sort of I don't know, if your guitar is in tune to that, then when you apply it to your reporting, you can report for scene, you can report for dialogue and motion and scene building. And so that's great. I imagine that's why you are where you are.
Yeah, and I also had like this incredible experience of my undergraduate writing teacher and mentor was David Foster Wallace, and at the time I was still thinking I wanted to be a fiction writer, but honestly, like I like his nonfiction often more than his fiction, or that like it just
Me too.
resonates with me
Yeah.
more. And so I think having him as an example of somebody who would go back and forth between these worlds, that they're not necessarily separate, and that you bring that same kind of attention and curiosity and empathy to reporting as you would to making something up. That was cool to have that in my brain at a like ridiculously early age in retrospect.
For sure. Yeah. And he, famously would, mark up people's pages with like 3 different colors, inks,
Yeah.
and everything. What did that teach you? What were some of those notes that, he would write there just as a coach and a mentor, like in your pieces that you've been able to, snowball and coalesce into something that, you can, parlay into the stories you've written today?
It's funny. I remember the thing that I remember most. I should go back and like I saved all of those drafts. He has these very funny, very particular little smiley faces, or like angry
Mm-hmm.
smiley faces that he would draw. And I mean, this is maybe not the answer you were expecting, but like the focus on grammar was so intense. We would do it is like a
Oh, I
3-hour
believe that.
workshop
Yeah.
or whatever, and we would spend the first like 45 minutes to an hour going over sentences. He would like take sentences out of people's drafts that were either, grammatically incorrect or infelicitous, as he would say. And then we as a class would be like, what's wrong with it? How do we make it better? And I think at the time I was like, this is just wild that this is how he would call it. He would always call these exercises your liberal arts dollars at work. And I was like, this is what the tuition is paying for. Like, really, we're talking about like dependent clauses. But I do think in retrospect that attention to like clarity at the sentence level, not even just of ideas. I mean, they're entwined, right? Like the way that you express your idea and the idea itself, and that focus on like saying something clearly and not having not sort of getting in your own way is hugely important. And I think about it a lot in just trying to like make my sentences the best versions of themselves. I definitely like feel him hovering over my shoulder with that. And then, he would talk a lot about having empathy for the reader and like having to kind of earn the reader's attention in a way, if that makes sense. Like, you don't just get
Yeah.
to expect that somebody's going to go along with you on something. You have to kind of win them over. And I think he had a conflicted relationship with that feeling of, trying to win the reader's heart or affection. But just that idea that you can't assume somebody is interested in something just because you are. You have to, through your language, through the delight and specificity of your language, through your like well expressed interesting ideas, you have to like bring them along, and you can't just be pedantic or tedious or like abusive to the reader.
But yeah, this idea of clarity and empathy for a reader is really important, and especially for someone, sometimes you read somebody like him, you want to impersonate that, and you realize that someone like him is very pyrotechnic, and he's very much a star. So for you, just in settling into your own skin as a writer, what was how did you cultivate your own voice so you did have that empathic understanding of a reader at the end, but still embodying something that is wholly you on the page?
For me, so it's so intuitive that it's hard to say exactly how it happens. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm trying to I'm thinking back to like early things that I wrote. I guess it's also that I found my way from writing fiction before just going straight into journalism. I started writing a bunch of essays, and I think in that form I felt like there was more space to have a voice, that I wasn't trying to sound like a New Yorker writer or a New York Times writer or something, have that idea of what that voice should be and trying to ventriloquize it. But I was writing these little essays that felt very much like they were just sort of for myself. And maybe that's another advantage of having gotten an MFA and like writing, toiling over these short stories that like never got published. And even if they had, would have been in some like tiny literary magazine that nobody reads. I had a little bit of freedom in my mind because I was like, whatever I publish, it's going to be, 30 people are going to read it. And that's like, there's like a glorious freedom in that because those 30 people are reading it because they really want to. And I could feel like I was, I don't know, doing something like secret and private. And that gave me the space to write how I wanted to write rather than trying to sound like somebody important or authoritative or official or impressive. So that it was like a winding route, I guess, to get where I am. But I'm very grateful that it went that way.
Who would you identify as big influences that have helped formulate, your voice as a writer?
Well, I mean, definitely have to shout out Janet Malcolm, R.I.P. That one hit me. I mean, I know she was old, but like, I don't know. I remember, I think it was like the second piece that I did for the New Yorker. She also had a piece in that issue, and just like seeing my name in that font, like next to her name, was
in the table of contents right there.
Yeah, I was just like, I can't believe that I'm in this same room, even if it's not an actual room. I mean, she came across, even within the sort of strictures of the New Yorker, like as such a distinctive, strange mind, and not in a pyrotechnic kind of way, like you were mentioning, but in a very restrained way. But you just got the sense that she was like so weird and so observant and like so critical and so self-critical. And there was just something about her, there was just something spiky about it that even more than Joan Didion, if like, those are going to be the two lyrical white ladies who write about crime, from the mid-century, who are going to appeal to a person like me. Really, if I had to pick one, I'd pick Janet, not Joan. And then, closer to home, Leslie Jamison was writing these beautiful essays. And I remember this was like even before the empathy exams came out. Her work was just, she was maybe one of the first people who felt like something of a peer, who I would notice her byline and just like perk up. And she was actually one of the first people when I wrote my first piece or when I pitched my first long form piece. I pitched it to the Oxford American, and I did it specifically because Leslie had published a piece in there, and I'm going to forget the title of it, but it was about a guy who was like a ultra marathon runner who was in prison, and just like this idea of confinement and the practice of like running. And it was just like so beautifully and thoughtfully reported. And I was like, I want to write something like that. I want to write for a place that would allow me to write something like that. And so I like cold emailed her. I had never met her. I don't know where I would have met her, and was like, hey, can I have like your editor's email? Cause I love that piece and I want to, pitch something like it. And she was very kind and made that connection.
That's amazing.
Yeah, she was just somebody who felt, Janet Malcolm felt like she was existing in this New York mid-century world that, was like looming huge above me, that felt almost like mythological. And Leslie was a person where I was like, okay, here's somebody who's like actually doing this, who's I think she might even be younger than me, but
that was something I wanted to ask too about, of sort of earning an audience with the editors from places you want to publish. And there is an example there of just you having the chutzpah, if you will, to email Leslie for a contact. And that's not an easy email to send. and it's certainly probably a harder one to reply to if you're Leslie, but she did and was very gracious about that. But so how did you get, how did you have the comfort to do it, to be like, or the audacity to do it in the best possible way? You know what I mean?
Totally. I mean, I think in that case, it really came from like it was that email that I wrote to her. I could go back and find it, but as I recall, it was like 75% like a genuine fan email. Like I just loved that piece that she wrote.
Yeah.
And it really did sort of like inspire me to write, or to like conceive of writing in a new way. And so I think that felt more acceptable, I guess, because it wasn't like coming from a place of like mercenary networking, and also
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
like from like pure ignorance. Like I didn't know that maybe, didn't even occur to me that it would be like a taboo. She also probably, it's like her fault for coming across like so relatable and
Yeah. It's your
nice in
fault.
her in her writing. I was like, I could just write her. We might have had like a friend of a friend in common. I'm trying to think, because it seems in retrospect, I'm like, wow, it's wild if I just emailed her out of the blue. So maybe we had a friend of a friend in common, but I'm actually not sure who that was. So it might have just been like pure audacity. And
Yeah.
then also like,
I mean that in like a very positive way.
oh
Like,
yeah,
not the
I get it.
audacity.
I get
No,
it.
but it takes, it's a confidence and audacity of hope, as our SBO would say.
And then I think honestly, like early on, and even, well, maybe less so now, but early on, like Twitter, I know we're all supposed to talk about how much we hate Twitter and it like destroys our minds, and that's certainly true. But for me, like living out here in the middle of nowhere in Texas, Twitter was really important in terms of like feeling like I was in some virtual way connected to a community of writers. And there just are people who like, I would follow them, they would follow me, and like whether that was editors or other writers. And that helped me feel like I could, ask for a connection, ask for somebody's email, like ask for a recommendation. And it wasn't just coming out of nowhere. It was like, I'm just thinking back to like the early days when the All existed. What a great website! That it felt like there was like a little cohort of writers who wrote for them and who read that website a lot, and we were all kind of in it together. And you could reach out to anybody and understand that they would help you out as best you could.
Well, getting to the heart of this community mindset that you're talking about, and this is how you got on my radar to reach out to you to come on the show. It's like I had been familiar with your work, but it was when I interviewed Jordan Michael Smith for his piece in The Atavist about Scott Kimball and that whole story that he wrote for The Atavist. He was like, well, he reached out. He knew like you had your finger on the pulse of this story, and he reached out to you in some way or another, and then he asked you if you wouldn't, is it okay if I pursue this story? And you're like, yeah, go for it. Like you like gave him that blessing and everything. And it was one of those things where you didn't hoard something. You gave it away to someone who could do it because your plate was full. And I was just like, oh, I got to talk to Rachel now, because this is an amazing feat of community. And I just love the ethos behind that.
I was so happy that he reached out, and he was like, he's been so kind and thoughtful about it. And I also really appreciate that he is, I don't know, like he could also like react to it in a sort of like hoarding or like scarcity mindset kind of way, right? And like not want to say that like this idea wasn't like, he didn't discover this like out in the wild. I mean, he basically did. I think I just like tweeted about it, and he was like, hey, can I follow up on this? And I gave him like one email address, and he ran with it. So it's like, 100% his story. But I don't know. Yeah, I think it's like the world is so full of amazing stories. And as a freelancer, it's easy to get, that scarcity mindset, that feeling of like panic. Where's my next story coming from? Wanting to like have as much as possible, because which I think comes from the fear that like it's all it all could run out at any minute. But there are so many stories out there that like I'm not the best person to write them because of, I don't know, like my background, my skills, my experience, my interest, like all of these things. And it's so much, but those stories like still should be written. And I think approaching the world from that sense of like, I just want to see this. I want to see somebody do this, and like I can't do it, but I can't wait to read it. And it was perfect. Then I got to like read this amazing story, and I didn't have to do any of that reporting, which seemed kind of tense, you know?
Oh, for sure. And it's it's all the more impressive to me because in this line of work, competition and jealousy and all that is kind of a real thing. And a lot, it's whether we want to acknowledge it or not, is definitely something that bubbles under the surface, some more fierce than others. And I wonder how you've been able to cultivate that the more abundant mindset that we're talking about. You just, because it is a much more fertile ground in which to grow a career and certainly grow a community.
Yeah, and I don't want to act like I don't ever have like petty feelings. I have plenty of petty feelings, but I try not to act on them, I guess. Save those for my therapist. But I mean, I think honestly for me, and I wonder if you find this out in Oregon, like I think not living in New York, I've never lived in New York, or LA or DC or like any of these places where it's like there are a lot of other writers. I think that has been very good for my mental health in a way, because it means I'm just like less exposed to the like gossipy part of our profession, and I spend less time sort of like hearing about like what a bunch of people who I don't really know, like what they're doing, what they got that I didn't get, what good or bad thing that they've done. And I mean, I love gossip. I love gossip as much as the next person. But I think there's a certain kind of industry gossip that whenever I do go to like a conference, or whenever I do spend time in New York and I start like hearing that insider info, I mean, there's a part of me that like loves it and just like laps it up. But I usually do walk away from it like feeling terrible about myself in one way or another. So I'm glad it wasn't like, that's not why I moved to Marfa, but I do think that being somewhat insulated from the professional hubs of this kind of work allows me to like have some distance and to like approach everybody with more generosity. And I mean, my favorite mode is like out here, there's like all the art people are out here. So I get to hear all the art gossip, and those people are vicious. There are also a lot of poets, so I get to hear like a certain amount of poet gossip. Those people are really vicious. And so I get to like satisfy my desire for gossip, but without it like being, it's like a world that's adjacent to my own but not my own, and that feels better.
I feel like it's poet vicious is going to be like its own kind of vicious adjective. It's just like, oh, like how vicious is that community out there? Well, it's not poet vicious, but it's vicious.
I mean, I think it's just like there isn't a commercial. Most of those people like they're not like operating in a world where there's like a commercial demand for what they do. So it's all based on like institutional affiliations, awards, grants, and stuff like that. And so much of that is like who is picked by who is affiliated by who do people like choose as their like mentees or successors or something. And so I think because there isn't, I don't know, all the money seems to like flow based on like personality and alliances. So I think that's why it's like very intense.
So how do you leverage your relative geographic isolation to still do this work that is incredibly visible in these prominent, very prominent magazines, New Yorker stories? That it's great. I think it's so inspiring that when people are like you or Eva Holland way the fuck up in the Yukon, that she's able to publish what she publishes, and then you're doing what you do where you are. So how have you been able to leverage your relative isolation to publish prominently?
Eva's so amazing, isn't she? She's like, her work is so cool.
Yeah,
She came and
it
visited a few
is.
years ago, and it was like the first time there had ever been a drag show in Marfa. We were pretty sure it was like the first ever. She's like, this place is
Wow.
crazy. I was like, it is not usually like this. um, but yeah, I mean, I think in both of our cases, well, it's because we've talked about it a little bit. There's the advantage of it, which is just like things come across your radar that, or you're exposed to like certain communities or certain issues or certain stories that like aren't going to come up in New York or LA or DC or even Portland. But at the same time, I think there can be there's like a editors don't always necessarily understand that those stories can be vital. So there's like the tendency of editors to maybe see stories in like rural places or remote places. You know, they want them to be like quirky or aberrant in some way, or they feel like, what does this have to say about, you know, like why is this going to resonate with somebody in a city? Like what happens out there has nothing to do with what happens, you know, here in New York, the center of the universe. But I think I've had a real advantage, or the way that I've been thinking about it more and more recently is that I guess there can be like a tendency to think about what happens in rural areas, like to rural places as like somehow, you know, backwards, like left behind, you know, stuck in the past. And I think in some cases that can be true, or aspects of that can be true. But also I think rural areas in some ways, like sometimes the flip side is true, and things show up here actually like before they like trickle down into New York. I mean, I always think about this story that I wrote for the New Yorker about essential oils, which actually like before I wrote it for them, I had pitched it everywhere for a year, over a year probably, because I was like out here in rural Texas and I was like, oh my gosh, all of these ladies, like every lady I know suddenly is like in a multi-level marketing thing, like selling essential oils. Like, this is huge. This is everywhere. Like the MLM thing and the essential oil thing. And I just like pitched it all over the place. And everybody was like, you know, most of the editors I pitched it to were like men in New York City. And they were just sort of like, I don't, like, no, it doesn't seem to me like this is everywhere. Like, what is this? This just seems like a weird thing that you guys are doing out in the country. And then through a circuitous path, I like did end up getting to write it for the New Yorker. And then like pretty soon after that, I don't know, I just started to see like, oh yeah, now everybody is like noticing that these multi-level marketing companies are just like really taking over the internet, and it's so huge. And I was just like at an Airbnb the other day, and there was like the shampoo was like Pantene Pro V now with essential oils, which is ridiculous because like all scent compounds are essential. So they've always had essential oils in their shampoo, but now it's like it's gotten to the point that like Pantene Pro V like feels like they need to advertise the essential oils in their shampoo. I was like, yes, this is like proof that this is a thing that I saw, and I saw it out here first because it was here first, you know? So
Yeah.
I think it's just like, for me, it's like reframing my own thought process, I guess, to see like what's showing up in the world around me. And what might be like new, or fresh, or like an indication of the way things are going. And then there's the whole other issue of like trying to convince an editor of that.
How do you go about, curating the ideas you want to follow? And then if one is really, really like makes your antenna stand up on end, how do you go about then, lobbying the right editor? What is the nature of your queries to really lobby them? Be like, yeah, I need to go pursue this story and I want you to pay me to do it.
I mean, it's funny. Sometimes I like go back and look at older pitches, and by older I mean just from like a handful of years ago, and like, oh, that was a really, no wonder nobody wanted that. Like it's such a specific skill form or art form in
Right?
like itself, you know. They're really hard. I think they're really hard. I have a hard time with them. So my like like one of my strategies is like just working with people that I've worked with enough before that I think they trust me. So even if my pitch isn't great. They know that I can produce something better than the pitch. But that's, that's tricky. You just have to have having those relationships, I think, with people over time is so, like,
Yeah,
so
you still have to
huge.
have that home run pitch to at least have to the foundation of which to have built that relationship on, and then you can be like, "Hey, there's this thing going on, and I think it's kind of cool. Do you mind if I check it out?" And like, "Okay, I've worked with Rachel before. Yeah, go for it." But
Yeah. But
you
how do
can't
you,
get
yeah.
there without, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think it took me a long time to internalize the advice that you hear a lot of people give, or the instruction that it's like, it's not enough to just find a subject, right? You need like a story. So that was really confusing to me for a long time. My pitch would just be like, hey, or even like with essential oils, like, essential oils, isn't that interesting? And isn't that interesting, like, isn't enough of an angle or a narrative, or like, there's not enough there. And so I think for me these days, I end up doing a lot of pre-reporting, or like pre-pitch reporting, and really trying to identify like who the characters would be, and like what the narrative would be. Like right now, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm like working on a story in the world of sperm donation. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like trying to find, just like, I know this is interesting, crazy stuff happening in the world of sperm. But I don't quite know, like, if I don't have a sense of like what the first scene might be, then I sort of feel like I'm not necessarily ready to pitch it yet. Like,
Right.
who am I going to follow? Like, what is the sort of animating narrative tension? And so I'll spend a lot of time like digging and trying to find that, and making phone calls, and that's tough, right? You're like doing a lot of money. I mean, doing a lot of work before you get any money, or before you have a contract, or before you even know if anybody's going to be into it. But it ends up, I think in the long run, it ends up meaning that I have fewer. I don't know. The worst thing for me is like getting an assignment and then being like, I actually don't know how to do this. And those are the pieces that end up getting killed, right? And I wish we as writers like talked
Mm-hmm.
about that more. I think like when a piece gets killed, it's often, it's like never spoken of again, right? And so I remember talking to a friend of mine who got a story killed. This was like a few years ago, and she was like so upset, and like really felt heartbroken about it, and like ashamed. And I was like, girl, I got like two pieces killed, already this year. And it's just, but I don't tweet about it, but maybe I should. So it's easy to sort of have the sense that like, everything, like, you only see the other people's like finished products, right? So you think like, oh, they're only producing finished products, but like there's so many false starts and dead ends and things that like never work out, and like disaster drafts, and tragic emails from editors and all that. And so I think like the stronger my pitch is, which is like, it's sort of like writing a book proposal, right? It's like the stronger the idea you have in your head of like, who's the character, who are the characters, what's the narrative, what's the structure, what's the idea. Like once I have, if you have that in your head, you're like giving yourself a head start. And it's like, if you know all that, the piece isn't going to get killed because you know what it is, and you have a strong sense of it. So though it is like a lot of advanced work, I'm coming around to understanding why they force us to do it.
Yeah, I think we should probably run with this ball a little more of the killed stories
Oh
and
no.
how demoralizing it can be. Uh,
Yeah.
it's it I imagine it can have they can be killed at any point, and uh what might you identify as the most devastating kill that you've had, and how you recovered from it?
I mean, devastating, I don't know. It's more frustrating, I think. Like, and usually like the pieces that I've had killed or like end up being a non-starter, usually I agree with the editor. Like I guess I can't think of anything that I've written where I've been like, yes, and the editor has been like, no. And I think that would be a real heartbreaker. Maybe that's happened and I like blocked it out of my memory, but usually I'm just like, I can't quite get this to work. And then I said what I have to my editor, and they're like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, you can't quite get this to work. And so in a way it's a relief. So I mean, I'm thinking about, there's like a story I appreciate, this is like an editor I've worked with a lot, and they've sort of like, I was like, I think we need to kill this story. Like, it's not, I did a reporting trip, I wrote a whole, 5 or 6 thousand word draft, and but I just like didn't quite feel right. And I sent it to him and I was like, I don't know. And he was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I think it needs another element. And we bandied about, this is about like DNA evidence. And I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
write a story about like a problem with like forensic science, but I was like, I don't want to do it in the traditional way, which is like you open with maybe a crime or somebody being arrested for a crime, and then you're like, but actually, like the science pointed in this direction, but then actually like it twists, and like maybe the science isn't so infallible after all. Pam Koloff does like the most amazing versions of those stories, but I was like, I want to write something slightly
Yeah.
different. Basically, we didn't have a case. Like, there was no case at the center of this. I was interested in the science, but the science, but I didn't have like, that central like crime story. And I was like, no, it's interesting to write it without that, but it wasn't interesting. But my editor has sort of like, I was like, I think after going back and forth a bunch of times, I was like, we can just kill it, it's fine. And he was like, no, I think just like put it on the back burner at some point, like the case will come, or the incident, or the scientist, or like whatever, it'll happen, and we'll revive it. So it's like, but this was like a couple years ago, so it hasn't officially been
Mm.
killed, but it's just sort of hovering there. And it's a little bit, in some ways I guess I'm glad that it's not killed, because I did a bunch of work on it and I know a lot about DNA now. And it would be a shame for
Mm-hmm.
that to go to waste. It is also a little bit of feels like a loop that's unclosed, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I love hearing you talk about this, and maybe this should be a new section of the show, like things we don't tweet about.
Uh-huh. Yeah, totally.
And I try to burrow underneath a lot of that stuff, a lot of the insecurities of writers, and what it's like, so other people out there can feel like, oh, you know what, it's, if Rachel feels that way, then I don't feel so shitty that I feel that way too. These people where you see their bylines in very prominent places, and you're like, oh my God, she's struggling with that. She's getting stories killed. And man, I just had one killed, and it took all this wind out of my sails. Like, oh, it's so good to hear her talk about that, just because I don't know, I feel so alone. Like, I'm the only one who's ever had a story killed. And it's just great to hear you talk about that, because like you said, these are the things we don't tweet about.
Yeah, and it happens to all of us. And I think I, like, for a long time, felt really, if I couldn't figure out how to make a story work, I would sort of like suffer alone and try to like force my way through it. And I've recently been trying to work more with, like, bring those concerns to an editor. I don't know, it's funny, I think everybody has like different relationships with their editors, but for me, I like to sort of like go off, like burrow into my cave until I have like a draft that's like as complete as I can do it, and like be like, ta-da, here it is, it's finished, or close to finished. There's something about like checking in with an editor in the draft phase that feels really like too vulnerable to me, or like, they're gonna be like, what, you don't know what you're doing, and we
Mhm.
rescind this assignment or something. But I'm trying, there's like a piece that I'm sort of struggling with right now, and instead of like suffering in silence and trying to force my way through it, I actually like, and trying to force the draft to happen, I like went to my editor and I was like, look, I can't quite figure this out. And we worked on it together, and then he brought it to senior editor at the magazine, and I think we're gonna, I don't know, it's just like relying, like feeling like I can rely on these people, like, the people who are working with me on the story, and not feeling like I need to show up as only like perfect and infallible. That's been a little bit of a quest for me, but I'm trying it out.
Oh, for sure. Well, since you write a lot about crime and everything, I mean, it's why detectives have partners, right?
Right. Totally.
They're
Totally.
never working alone. It's collaborative. Someone else might have a blind spot that someone else might see. Their commanding officers above them be like, "Did you look at this? I have this much more experience." Like, blah 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 blah, and it's just like, oh, and they might have the skeleton key that'll help unlock it, and it doesn't make you, the writer, or in this case the detective, a weaker detective. It's just like, oh, someone imbued their experience with you and helped you see something you couldn't see. And then all of a sudden it's off to the races again. And you have more a rejuvenated momentum to go pursue and close the deal.
Totally. But I think I guess I don't know where I absorbed this idea, but as a freelancer, I definitely had the sense that like I need to be so easy to work with. I need to,
Right,
I mean, I think I almost always, I can think of a handful of times that I have missed a deadline, but I'm like, I hit my deadlines. I try to be like so pleasant and easy because I just realized there are like a million people. There's not a million, but there's, like 1,000 people who do what I do really well. And, I'm like, they're just working with me based on, I don't know. It's like that lack of security. I feel like it's really easy to internalize that and to feel like you need to, I'm sure it's like a gendered thing too, like need to be really, really, really easy and pleasant to work with. And then but it's also just realizing that, saying like, I don't know how to do this. That's not being difficult to work with. It's actually like in service of the piece. So this is the pep talk that I'm giving myself these days. So I'm saying it out loud.
It's amazing. I love it. Well, it's easy as a freelancer to feel disposable. And,
yes, exactly.
And that's where a lot of the insecurity can come from, is just like, well, if I'm not easy to work with, if I'm not going 4 for 4 at the plate every single time I bring a draft to them, they'll be like, well, we're going to kill this. And it's like, they're not paying your health insurance and contributing to your 401k. So it's just like, who cares?
Totally.
We don't have to, we're not really beholden to her. And so that is very hard as a freelancer. Yeah, you get to call your own shots, but at the same time, they can call the shots and, push you off a cliff.
And do you ever, this is like a totally masochistic thing that I do. I haven't done it in a little while, but like sometimes reading old pieces like from Esquire or GQ or something like from the 90s and then like Googling the person's name and being like, wow, that was a really good piece. Like this person wrote this really big story, in like 1997 and then just, didn't like what happened to their career and, you never hear from them again or they're like in PR or something. I don't know. It's just, there's like no guarantees in this business. And I think that's become only more and more true with like the consolidation of media and the way that like digital media companies are going. And so I don't know, it's scary. It's scary to like, it's a scary world we're in.
Absolutely. And do you, when I, read that profile about you, there was the part where you write some white papers for some other companies too. That's kind of more of like an anchor type gig thing. Is that something you still do that is helps subsidize the journalism you want to do in the fallow periods between pieces?
I did that up until I got my book contract, and that was like a really scary moment for me, saying, like giving up that work, because that was sort of the way that I knew that I could always pay my rent, right? And there was a part of me that like wanted to sort of keep doing it, but I don't know. It was like a symbolic act for me, I guess, to be like, no, you know what? Like this book is actually my job now. And so I gave it up. But every now and then sometimes they email me and ask me to write a little something, and I don't mind getting a check, so I'll still do it, but it's very intermittent. It's not my main thing anymore. But again, I wish that was something that writers talked about more, like how are you actually making money, because it's just, and honestly, like at this point, my book contract money is like that's gotten all the money from it. I'm never going to get any royalties. So at this point, like the main way that I'm able to sustain myself is like a number of my stories have gotten optioned, right? And so that's just like this strange chunk of like free money that arrives. But if that wasn't happening, then I don't think like even writing like feature stories for the New Yorker and the Atlantic, I don't know if it would, I don't know. I would feel like financially precarious, I think, if there wasn't this like random infusion of Hollywood money every now and then.
Oh yeah, for sure. And this is another one of those things that writers don't tweet about, is that there are people sometimes doing content marketing writing that it is journalism adjacent, but not on their beat. so to speak, and it's something that, or ghostwriting, things that
Yeah.
kind of, keep the coffers full, so then you can take, bigger artistic, in quotes, swings with, the features that really excite you. And even though it looks to the outsider like, oh, that's someone is just categorically crushing it and they're just writing long form features for the New Yorker, that's what they're sustaining themselves on. Well, the fact is, probably not. And there are these other revenue streams that people just don't publicize, but they're doing more or less not even on the side. It might be the main thing. And it's like a shadow career underneath what they really want to do. But it's what keeps the lights on and allows you to take the big swings.
Totally. And I wish people talked about it more, because I talked to kind of like writers who are just starting out, and they are clearly like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, how can a person live this way? And it's like, well, because like nobody actually is living this way, like you marry rich, or you do some like content marketing, and
For
it's
sure.
like terrible to feel like somehow like if you can't sustain yourself by writing pieces for like $200, $300, there's something wrong with you. You're failing at it. It's like, no. This is like, you're not getting the full picture. So that's why I think it is really important to talk about that stuff.
That's great, yeah. And I'd be remiss too if I didn't, ask you how you came across Curtis Minder for the latest piece that you wrote for the New Yorker, the Go Between. How did that get on your radar?
Well, that's like a funny one, because this was an assignment, or it was like an idea that my editor floated by me, and at first I was like, "Are you sure?" Like, I'm not a tech reporter. I mean, my first reaction was like, oh my gosh, yes, like I'll do anything for you. He's my favorite editor. So wonderful to write for the magazine. But then as soon as I said yes, I started freaking out, because I was like, this is not, I'm not a tech reporter. Like, I don't like, what is ransomware? Are you sure you want me to do this? So I like called him up and kind of tried to like talk him out of giving me the assignment. And he's a wonderful person. He was like, no. And I think this is like a really important thing for people to think about too, is, I don't know, one way that I trip myself up a lot, and particularly I think more so earlier in my career, was feeling like, how do I have the authority to say anything about anything? Like, how can I write about anything unless I'm like a expert in it? People get PhDs in this, people build multi-decade careers in this. Like, why would I have anything to say? In some ways, I think that like insecurity is like not entirely a bad thing, because it really does drive me to do a ton of research, and maybe some people would call it over research, but I think it's like hugely important for helping me like understand a subject. And I think there's like a Rachel Gansa, I think there's an interview where she might have been her long form interview or something else, where she talks about this, like how important it is to like do that over reporting, even if it doesn't make it into the piece. It's like you're approaching a subject as if like with that humility of being like, I don't know anything about this. Like, I have so much to learn. And that sort of becomes like the iceberg, the massive iceberg of like knowledge that you amass, even if most of it doesn't make it into the piece.
For sure. And the courage to be like the moron on this. Like, I have no idea what this is. Like, pretend I'm a first grader, because I'm basically a first grader. And I apologize ahead of time for asking really inane questions, but in my defense, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm wildly curious. So please just talk to me like I'm a first grader.
And I would say, like, for this piece, like my initial interviews, I came away from them feeling really bad, because like I did a ton of reading, but like this was a subject that I was like learning about. And so I think my initial interviews, it was really clear that this was something that I was like that I was learning about. But then I think, it is important to approach it like with that humility and with that willingness to like, that you need to learn a lot and like to humble yourself before everything that you don't know. It's much better than like approaching something with, like arrogance. Right. But at the same time, I think you can't let that like stop you from, then like actually doing the work and learning. And I don't know, I always think about like, it's really important that people write about technology or law or politics or finance, all of these like subjects that are these specialized fields. It's really important that people like from outside of those worlds understand them. Honestly, in some ways, like the corporate work that I did, which was mostly for like financial companies, was weirdly empowering in a way, because I was like, I don't know I've never taken an economics class. Like, I don't know anything about this. How are you going to let me write a white paper about it? And then I realized like, oh, this is not some like arcane world that I can't, like, I'm a reasonably intelligent person. I can learn about this enough to talk about it with other reasonably intelligent people. Like, it's actually really harmful that these things get treated as if they are these rarefied realms that you can only understand, you know, like if you have multiple advanced degrees in economics or something. It's like, no, we can all, if we all like sort of bend our smart minds to like think about what's going on here, like we can understand it too. And so it was the same thing with the ransomware stuff. Like I did a ton of reading to like get myself up to speed. And then I had to do like a ton of psyching myself up and being like, no, it's important that, you know, ransomware is like affecting like almost everybody at this point. And it's being written about in these like technical spheres, but there are a lot of people who it's affecting who are never going to read those technical manuals, who aren't going to understand them. And I frankly don't need to understand how it works, like, you know, on the level of the network, to be able to talk about how it functions as a social phenomenon. So yeah, it was kind of a fun story. And I think the reason that I was like reached out to a bunch of people in this world and had a ton of conversations, and Curtis was a person I found who was able to like talk to me like he wasn't talking down to me. He explained things in a like human to human kind of way. And that was the sort of piece I was trying to write. Like, how does a normal human being like understand what's going on with this, you know, strange new cybercrime world? And so he was just a person that I helped me feel like I understood this, rather than like the opposite feeling of, you know, oh my gosh, I'll never understand this. I'm like, you know, too dumb or ignorant, which some other people did make me feel that way. And so I think that was, it's always good to make like that person the centerpiece of a story, because you're sort of bringing everybody along with you. They're like a good guide to a world that might otherwise feel forbidding or intimidating.
Yeah, Lawrence Wright would call it the mule of the story.
Exactly.
Yep. And over the course of you know, your body of work to date, you know, what would you identify as maybe the through line of your curiosity?
Oh my gosh, what a good question. You know, I was talking to my friend, I'll name drop because they're a cool friend to have. My friend Eileen Miles, the poet and genius. And I was explaining this, I want to write a book. I'm like putting together a book proposal for a second book about gun culture. And I was kind of trying to like struggle to articulate why it was interesting to me. And Eileen was like, you know, you're interested in like looking at things that other people don't want to look at and like going inside them, things that people would rather not like go inside. And you want to talk about them from the inside. And I was like, you know what? That's a good way of putting it. That is like something that drives me. I think that connects some of the stories about crime or some of the stories about, you know, like uglier social or political aspects, you know, writing about the manosphere, which I've written about, or things like, you know, GoFundMe and racism, or just like some of the darker motivations of the human soul. And
Nice.
that was like, I appreciated them saying that.
And as I bring this conversation to a close, I always like to ask people for, you know, a recommendation of some kind. And like I said, that could be a book, a movie, a podcast, or it could be a brand of coffee you're excited about. So I'd extend that to you, Rachel. You know, what is something out there you might recommend for the wayward listener?
Can I have two?
Oh, yes, please.
Great. Maybe it's silly to talk about these two things next to each other, but two things that have been making me happy. I've been rereading the like brilliant Natalie Diaz just won the Pulitzer Prize for her most recent book of poems, Post-Colonial Love Story. And I've been rereading that in honor of her. She's just like such a she's like one of the smartest people that I've ever met. It's incredible to be around her, but also like with a really, I don't know, she knows how to like live. I admire how she like lives in the world, like just with her senses and her brain wide open and her heart and her intellect, and that's all there in the poems. And so it seems like the Pulitzer Prize is like a good excuse as ever to reread those or read them for the first time. Her first book is also amazing. I'm also a really big fan of nuts.com. Just got like another package in the mail. Do you know nuts.com?
I've seen the commercials, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know they had commercials. I bet they're amazing. They're just, you get this box like full of, candied walnuts and like pretty cheap pistachios and like wheatgrass powder and like vegan gummies and I don't know, just all these snacks. Just like a good vibe from that place. They used to always give you like a little free sample in all your boxes, but they stopped doing that. So maybe the corporate overlords have like made them into less of a nice company. But I feel like reasonably priced snack packs can't go wrong. Nuts.com.
Fantastic. And you don't want to recommend Testosterone Planet, True Stories
maybe
from
a
man's world?
I almost wish I had bought it just to look at it. I mean, I bet some of those stories are good. It's just like really worst like marketing plan that I've ever seen. Truly, very
yeah,
90s.
and I'll be sure to I'll link up to that. It's just, that's an inside joke for anybody. Like Rachel tweeted out the most unnecessary book of all time. It was hilarious. I'll make sure I embed that tweet or something because it's just hilarious. And the fact that something like that even exists in the world, delivered and packaged in that way, says a lot about the year 2000.
Exactly. Very much so.
Rachel, where can people find you online and get more familiar with your work?
On my intermittently updated website, I guess, which is rachel-monroe.com, or, on Twitter. I'm on Twitter too much at Rach Monroe.
Fantastic. Well, what a pleasure to talk to you and get more familiar with your work and everything, Rachel. So thanks so much for the time, and best of luck and continued success.
Thank you so much. It was really fun to chat.
That was inspiring. I think it really was. I remember living in upstate New York and thinking that it was far too remote there. And we're just talking Saratoga Springs area. Like, I don't know, that's about 2 hours north of the city. Anyway, I remember that being, I'm like, oh, this is too remote to have a successful freelance career here. What a fool. Marfa, Texas, where Rachel lives, is in western Texas, and there isn't a whole lot nearby there. And I know a lot of people who have very good, sustainable, it might be a struggle, but sustainable freelance careers from remote places. I'm thinking Eva Holland, like way up in the Arctic Circle practically. And she's doing her thing. She's been a 2-time guest on this show. It can be done. You don't need to be in these hubs to get it done. And the fact is, I was and am just not good enough at this racket to make it work. And so I work part-time for the benevolent overlords of a Gannett newspaper, a dead-end job where hope does in fact go to die. Thanks, of course, to Rachel for coming on the show. What a treat. Hope to have her back when maybe she's got a new book coming out at some point or another. Savage Appetites is her current book that came out a year ago. And thank you to West Virginia Wesleyan College's MFA in Creative Writing at the Hippocamp 2021 for the support. Drop that CNF Pod 21 code for 50 clams off your registration. Tell them B.O. sent you. I'm going to keep beating that Patreon drum because that's what's going to take the show to the next level, man. Having the show be listener supported gives you ownership, gives you agency, helps pay writers. And speaking of that, oh boy, I need to cut a few checks. After taxes and fees from Patreon, I think the writers are going to get about $25. I mean, for a literary magazine, that's like Puff Daddy money. Helps me make a better product, of course, helps me celebrate more CNFers, build the community, and it's not like you get nothing in exchange for a few bucks a month. So go window shop at patreon.com/CNFpod. And you know what? You could email me what you think would be worth it to you. Like, I'd be a patron if you offered this. As if putting the show out every week weren't enough, but I get it. This show comes out for free every week, always has for close to 9 years. And then to pass around the collection plate, I understand. I get that 99% of the audience is like, yeah, hard pass, BO. What that means is I need to offer you something that is magnitudes of order more valuable than $2 a month or $4 a month or $10 a month. So if you have ideas, I'm open to them. All right? You know, if that's like, okay, I will join this tier if you did this. So, yeah, want to do it. Yeah, it's up to you. Visit BrendanO'Mara.com for show notes and to sign up for the Up to 11 monthly newsletter. 11 recommendations, including books, articles, blogs, pods, writing prompts, and interviews. And also that code for the exclusive CNF and happy hour that I tend to do on the second Wednesday of the month. Sometimes there's a special guest. Sometimes it's just me hanging out with a few newsletter folks. It's kind of fun to have a beverage of choice and talk shop and see what's on your mind. Newsletters first of the month, no spam. Can't beat it. All right, so downer alert. You heard of spoiler alert, so this is kind of like a downer alert. So you can feel free to either skip this or skip through it or delete or unsubscribe. Don't do that, but you could. Power is in your hands. What I'm slowly realizing is that in order to get good at something, you have to have diligence and the willingness to say no to a lot of things, to almost everything, really. We really can get quite good and skilled at anything we put our minds to, but the problem becomes we put our minds on too many things, most of us anyway, and the few of us who don't are exceptional at what they do, and we wonder why. Why am I a shitty journalist and reporter and writer of narrative features? Because I don't do enough of them. Why don't I have more freelance assignments? Well, because I haphazardly pitch, waste my time doing other bullshit, and don't have enough pitches out there. And about the only thing I'm decent at these days is interviewing and producing this podcast. But for all the time and labor it takes to put this show together through editing and admin and trying to just be good and in service of the listener, it's a glorified hobby. That's it. Hobbies don't pay the bills. And this show certainly does not do that, much to the chagrin of my domestic partner and producer Hank. I haven't had a book published in 10 years. What did I do the last 10 years? I think I wrote perhaps 10 features, a few columns, an essay or two. I'm 10 years older and 10 years more bitter and 10 years sadder, and not an inch farther than where I was at 31 years old. I've been doing this pod for more than 8 years. It's in its 9th year. I know people who are in my sphere who started podcasting like the last year or two, have something like hundreds of Patreon supporters and pull in thousands of dollars a month from just their podcast alone. It's like, I know I talk about running your own race and trying not to compare yourself to others, but when you sit with it and objectively and dispassionately look at your life and your career and your body of work, you soon realize the reality of it all. And it hits you across the face like, damn, that you did something wrong and you keep doing the same things wrong and expecting a different result, that age-old definition of insanity. And how are all these other people doing it? Why haven't I graduated to the next level when so many people have? When I've put in so many years of this endless tire-spinning grind? At least in sports, they have the decency to cut you when you're too deluded to quit. At some point, maybe I just have to have the courage to cut myself from the team. I have a poster of a cat that is a kitten, and it's jumping in the air, it's swinging, it's about to miss this rope, so it's going to fall. And the slogan is from despair.com, and the caption says, at some point, hanging in there just makes you look like a bigger loser. So I've got some thinking to do, CNFers. Stay cool. Stay cool forever. See ya.